They say in Boston's medical tech hub that blood is thicker than water. Nobody warns you that when the chief executive officer's son decides to bleed you dry exactly 24 hours before your $300,000 bonus, he might just slit his own throat. I spent years building systems that save lives. But on that day, I stepped back and let an arrogant fool dig his own grave. Hello, dear listeners of the Boss Revenge Stories channel, and thank you from the bottom of my heart for your continued support. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely disabled our monetization features, leaving us without the budget to operate, which means we are forced to halt all new video uploads here in the near future and transition our operations entirely over to Patreon. If you find today's story compelling, please consider supporting us by joining the Boss Revenge Stories Patreon channel to hear exclusive, verified true stories that are even better, featuring significantly longer runtimes and highly detailed scenarios that we simply cannot publish on YouTube, all brought to life by multiple emotional voice actors in a single episode. You can easily join us by scanning the Patreon QR code currently displayed on your screen or by clicking the link provided in the video description or the pinned comment section. Now, let us begin today's story, where my name is Natalie Fisher, and I am about to show you what happens when an arrogant boss writes a check his ignorance cannot cash. I am 38 years old, and for years, my entire existence revolved around the glowing servers at Ethos Medical Robotics here in Boston. As the talented lead systems engineer, I poured my absolute soul into building an artificial intelligence for medical diagnostics, a system meticulously designed to save countless human lives. We had just crossed the ultimate finish line, pushing the project through the most grueling and strict clearance tests imaginable. Because of my flawless execution, I was exactly 24 hours away from receiving a performance bonus of $300,000. That massive sum was the company's contractual promise to me, the hard-earned reward for practically living in my office and building their flagship technology from the ground up. But the corporate elite have a very specific, ruthless way of rewarding loyalty. At exactly 4 o'clock in the afternoon on a seemingly normal Tuesday, the glass door to my private office violently swung open. In marched Julian Croft. He was the chief executive officer's monumentally arrogant son, a man who had just been forcefully stuffed into the vice president chair by his father. Despite possessing zero technical background, he wore a smug, superior expression that matched his overly expensive tailored suit, and without an ounce of hesitation, he threw a single piece of paper onto my desk. It was a termination of employment notice, effective immediately. "We are moving into a new era of personnel restructuring," Julian declared, his voice dripping with unearned authority and mocking disdain. "Frankly, Natalie, your well of ideas has completely run dry. We need forward-thinking innovators, not people clinging to outdated concepts. You are done here." He barely took a breath before sharply waving his hand at the two large security guards flanking him in the doorway. "You have exactly 5 minutes to surrender your credentials and pack your personal belongings. I am having the security team strip all your network access rights as we speak." Julian stood there, practically vibrating with anticipation. He was desperately waiting for the breakdown. He wanted me to cry, to beg for my job, to plead for the $300,000 that was rightfully mine. I wanted a dramatic, pathetic display of despair to validate his fragile ego and his newfound power. Instead, I looked right through him, seeing nothing but a hollow, cowardly little boy playing boss. I kept my face as cold and hard as ice. I did not utter a single word of protest or shed a single tear. I calmly picked up my pen, signed the termination paper without a trembling finger, and packed a small cardboard box with my few personal items. With absolute silence and perfect posture, I walked out of my office and marched straight out of the building. Dozens of my colleagues stood up from their desks, watching in sheer disbelief and shock as the lead engineer of their most vital project was escorted out into the street like a common trespasser. That night, alone in the quiet comfort of my apartment, I did not succumb to despair. I did not frantically call employment lawyers or cry over my stolen money. Instead, I poured myself a rich glass of red wine, leaned back against my kitchen counter, and began silently counting down the hours. Julian was a greedy, arrogant fool who acted in extreme haste to eliminate me. Because of his profound ignorance, he had completely overlooked the catastrophic loophole embedded deep within strict federal regulations. As I took a slow sip of wine in the dark, I knew with absolute certainty that by abruptly firing me and forcefully cutting my system access, he had just dug his own corporate grave. The next morning, I woke up long past my usual grueling schedule. The sun was already casting bright, golden rays across my bedroom floor, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the quiet air. For the first time in 8 long years, my chest did not feel tight with the suffocating pressure of corporate demands. I slowly got out of bed, padded into the kitchen, and took my time brewing a dark roast coffee. Standing by the window, I looked out at the bustling Boston streets below. The city was rushing, filled with people racing to offices where they would trade their youth for a paycheck. I was finally free from that exhausting cycle. The exhaustion that had seeped into my bones over nearly a decade of relentless dedication to ethos felt as though it was beginning to wash away in the morning light. The bizarre sense of absolute freedom was deeply intoxicating, a stark contrast to the sterile, high-pressure laboratories I had called home for so long. I walked over to the kitchen counter, picked up my personal mobile phone, and simply powered it down. I tossed the dark, silent piece of metal into a drawer, burying it under a stack of old mail. I did not need to hear the frantic ringing that I knew would inevitably come. Instead, I opened my personal laptop and connected to my secure home network. I bypassed all regular news sites and navigated straight to the public information portal maintained by the United States Food and Drug Administration. This was a highly secure federal dashboard, a digital fortress that held the absolute truth of medical compliance. Right there, etched in the registry under the Ethos Diagnostic Project, was my name. I was exclusively designated as the biometric security key holder. In the realm of advanced medical artificial intelligence, you cannot simply swap out lead engineers like changing a light bulb in a hallway. Federal regulations mandate strict, uncompromising patient safety protocols. According to federal law, if a designated key holder is suddenly disconnected from the active network without submitting a formal 30-day transition document to another federally licensed engineer, the government assumes a catastrophic security breach has occurred. To protect potential patients from erratic or compromised artificial intelligence, the overarching system is programmed to initiate a partial self-destruct sequence. It is a brilliant, unforgiving failsafe. It instantly severs the connection between the medical algorithms and the live hospital networks, locking the source code down tight. Julian, in his supreme arrogance and desperate rush to throw me out the door, had no idea this safeguard even existed. He was too busy enjoying his quick power trip to actually read the compliance manuals. I took another slow sip of my coffee, letting the rich flavor coat my tongue. My eyes remained fixed on the digital clock resting in the corner of my screen. The seconds ticked by in a heavy, rhythmic pulse. 8:58, 8:59. The tension in my silent apartment was palpable, a thrilling, quiet anticipation of the impending corporate disaster. Then, exactly at 9 o'clock in the morning, the standard green interface on the federal portal flickered violently. The screen flashed once, twice, and then the entire dashboard turned a glaring, angry shade of crimson. A massive banner appeared across the monitor in bold, unforgiving letters. It read, "System disabled, patient safety protocol violation." The trap had officially snapped shut. The chain reaction was instantaneous and devastating. Vanguard Health, a massive hospital network holding a $50 million partnership contract with Ethos, was hardwired to respond to these federal alerts. Their automated security protocols instantly froze all active transactions. Across the region, vital hospital servers forcefully disconnected themselves from the Ethos mainframes to avoid severe medical liability. That $50 million contract was the absolute financial backbone of the company, and in a matter of milliseconds, it was entirely paralyzed. The massive diagnostic engine I had built was now a dead, useless brick sitting on their server racks. I smiled softly, the warmth of the coffee settling pleasantly in my stomach. I calmly folded my laptop shut, grabbed my coat from the rack, and decided it was a beautiful day to go for a long walk, completely ignoring the invisible time bomb that had just violently detonated inside the Aetherius headquarters. The crisp morning air rolling off the Charles River was a welcome change from recycled office oxygen. I was halfway through my walk when a harsh, vibrating hum broke the tranquility. It was exactly 10:30 in the morning, while my personal phone sat dead in a kitchen drawer. I carried a secondary, heavily encrypted device strictly reserved for catastrophic medical emergency alerts. Only 3 people on the planet had the routing number to bypass its filter. When I pressed the receiver to my ear, I did not hear the polished corporate executive who had smugly marched into my office yesterday. Instead, the voice tearing through the speaker was hoarse, completely fractured, and gasping for air like a drowning man. It was Julian. "Natalie," he choked out, his breath rattling violently against the microphone. "What did you do? What the hell did you do to my network?" He did not wait for an answer. The sheer panic in his chest erupted into blind, irrational rage. He began screaming, his words stumbling over one another in a frantic rush. He accused me of launching a malicious cyber attack, of hacking into the Aetherius mainframes to exact some petty revenge. "I have lawyers drafting federal indictments right now," Julian roared, though the severe tremor in his voice completely ruined the threat. "You are going to federal prison for this. You are going to rot behind bars if you do not log in and instantly restore the Vanguard Health connection. Turn it back on. Natalie, turn it back on right now." I kept my pace steady along the walking path, watching a flock of birds scatter into the blue sky. My heart did not race. My palms did not sweat. I let him scream until his lungs gave out, and he was left dry, heaving into the receiver. When the line fell relatively quiet, save for his ragged breathing, I spoke. My voice was perfectly flat, a chilling contrast to his absolute hysteria. "I did not do anything, Julian," I replied, enunciating every single syllable with surgical precision. "I am not hacking you. I am not logged into your servers. The system is simply executing its fundamental patient protection protocols. It is designed to automatically sever all hospital ties in the absence of a legally liable key holder. That is the exact position you forcefully terminated yesterday afternoon." A heavy, suffocating silence dropped over the line. I could practically hear the gears violently grinding inside his head as the horrifying reality of his actions finally pierced through his thick skull. But the nightmare was only just beginning for him. "Fix it," he demanded, though the command sounded much more like a desperate whimper. "Just give me the bypass code. Give me the administrative override." "You cannot bypass a federal security lock with a simple password, Julian," I explained, enjoying the slow, agonizing destruction of his ego. "To restore the Vanguard Health connection, the system requires 2 distinct things. First, it needs my live, biometric fingerprint scan. Second, it requires the physical encrypted hardware key." I paused for a fraction of a second, letting the immense weight of my next words settle over him. "The exact same hardware key that I surrendered to your Human Resources Department yesterday, the one that, according to the extremely strict, immediate termination protocols you personally authorized, was fed into an industrial shredder at 8 o'clock this morning." The reaction was instantaneous and violently explosive. Through the phone, I heard the distinct, shattering crash of something heavy being hurled against a wall. But the destruction was not coming from Julian. The deafening noise echoed from the adjacent room, followed immediately by a guttural, terrifying scream of pure rage. It was the chief executive officer. Julian's father had clearly just realized that his arrogant son had single-handedly vaporized the company's most lucrative contract. The muffled shouts from the background were unmistakable, filled with profanity and the agonizing realization of total financial ruin. The sound of his father's wrath shattered whatever remained of Julian's pathetic pride. The transition was spectacular to witness. The vicious corporate predator vanished entirely, instantly replaced by a terrified, whimpering child. "Natalie, please," Julian begged, his voice cracking into a high-pitched sob. The aggressive threats of federal court were entirely gone. Please, I am begging you. There has to be a back door, a master emergency recovery code. Something, anything. My father is going to absolutely destroy me. The board of directors is going to crucify me. I will pay you. I will give you your bonus right now. Just tell me how to turn it back on. I was openly weeping, the tears practically audible through the digital connection. He was offering me the very money he had stolen from me, pleading for salvation from the roaring fire he had lit with his own two hands. I stopped walking. I looked out over the calm water, feeling a profound, untouchable sense of absolute peace wash over me. I am no longer your employee, I stated, my tone colder than the winter wind. Before he could utter another pathetic sob, I firmly pressed the end button. The screen went black, cutting off the chaotic symphony of his destruction, and returning me to the beautiful, uninterrupted silence of my morning. By 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the initial adrenaline rush of the morning had settled into a sharp, hyper-focused state of mind. I was sitting at my kitchen island, organizing my digital portfolio, when a silent, encrypted notification flashed across my secondary monitor. It was a secure data drop originating from a covert internal communications channel I had quietly established years ago. The sender was a brilliant but incredibly timid junior systems analyst. He was someone I had personally mentored, shielding him from the ruthless, toxic corporate culture that infected every floor of Aetheris. The message attached to the incoming file was brief, practically vibrating with nervous energy. Look at the financial routing from last night. Then look at the compliance logs. You need to see this right now. I immediately initiated my decryption protocols, unzipping the heavily guarded package. It was a massive data dump extracted directly from the internal financial servers, specifically targeting the executive payroll and the confidential project budget ledgers. As a lead systems engineer, I am intimately accustomed to reading complex, labyrinthine code, but numbers moving through a ledger tell a narrative just as vividly as any programming language. I meticulously traced the algorithmic pathways of the budget specifically allocated for my artificial intelligence diagnostic department. Suddenly, the chaotic puzzle pieces of my abrupt, humiliating firing began to snap together into a horrifying, brilliant picture. Julian had not terminated my employment because of some visionary corporate restructuring plan. He did not genuinely believe my innovative ideas were running dry. He fired me because he desperately, urgently needed my money. Digging deep within the obscured accounting logs, I uncovered a newly registered vendor account. It was a phantom shell company, registered to a completely fabricated address in a state halfway across the country. The timeline was damning. Exactly 24 hours before my performance bonus was scheduled to be automatically dispersed by the payroll system, Julian had manually intervened and rerouted the entire sum, my $300,000, along with a massive, unauthorized chunk of the operational project budget, had been siphoned directly into this ghost account under the guise of an emergency software licensing fee. I ran a rapid, aggressive background trace on the receiving routing numbers. The money was absolutely not staying within the legitimate corporate ecosystem. The funds were being rapidly funneled outward to a series of offshore accounts heavily monitored for laundering money on behalf of violent, illicit gambling syndicates. The truth was sickeningly clear. The arrogant golden boy of Aetheris had amassed a colossal, unpayable debt in the dangerous underground betting markets. He was cornered, facing severe physical consequences from very dangerous people, and my hard-earned bonus was his desperate, cowardly lifeline. But the financial theft, as disgusting and greedy as it was ultimately just a standard white-collar crime. It was a predictable move for a desperate executive. The real shock, the fatal, catastrophic blow that made the blood in my veins run completely cold, was buried deep within the second folder of the data dump. My loyal colleague had not just pulled the financial records, he had also extracted the administrative access logs for the early morning hours, documenting everything that happened right before the entire hospital network crashed. Julian had clearly realized the immense gravity of the Food and Drug Administration compliance issue, but he realized it just a little too late. As the system began screaming for a designated, licensed engineer to maintain the live patient safety connection, Julian went into a state of blind, irrational panic, desperate to keep the Vanguard Health servers online and hide his disastrous mistake from his father. He committed the ultimate, unforgivable sin. The digital logs provided a flawless, time-stamped narrative. At exactly 7 in the morning, someone logging in from Julian's personal executive terminal had forcibly accessed the Federal Medical Compliance Portal. They had uploaded a hastily drafted, formal authorization letter, officially attempting to transfer my exclusive biometric security clearance to a 22-year-old software intern who barely understood the basic architecture of the system. The fatal flaw in his desperate plan was the authorization itself. That specific legal document required my verified, cryptographic digital signature to be considered legally binding by the federal government. Julian, utilizing his supreme administrative privileges on the local network, had illegally cloned my encrypted electronic signature. He then weaponized it, stamping the fake document and submitting it directly to a federal government database. I stared at the glowing screen, my breath completely catching in my throat as the sheer magnitude of his monumental stupidity washed over me. He honestly thought he was just sweeping a hasty human resources error under the rug. He had absolutely no idea that tampering with live biometric safety protocols and actively forging identities on official medical compliance documents instantly elevated his panicked actions from simple corporate embezzlement to a severe federal felony. This was not just a breach of contract. This was criminal medical record fraud, carrying mandatory minimum sentences. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, the soft, rhythmic hum of my computer tower being the only sound in the dead quiet room. The power dynamic had shifted so violently it was almost dizzying. I was no longer just a disgruntled, wronged former employee holding the administrative keys to a paralyzed $50 million contract. I was now the sole guardian of irrefutable evidence proving a federal crime. I was holding the absolute power to send the chief executive officer's arrogant son to a federal penitentiary for the rest of his natural life. My mind seamlessly shifted away from the initial shock and locked into pure, calculating engineering mode. Every digital action leaves an indelible footprint, and I knew exactly how to track it. I did not just read the provided files. I surgically extracted the raw underlying data. I pulled the exact internet protocol addresses, the precise machine hardware identification codes, and the unalterable server timestamps detailing every single millisecond of his digital forgery. I compiled every shred of this damning evidence into a tightly sealed, heavily encrypted digital vault. With a few swift, deliberate keystrokes, I transmitted a mirrored, undeniable copy of the entire package directly to my personal attorney. I attached strict instructions for him to hold the package under extreme legal lock and key, ready to be deployed at a moment's notice. The evidence was definitively secured. The trap was perfectly laid out. All I had to do now was sit back and wait for the corporate rats to realize they were already caught in the maze. The following morning, precisely at 10 o'clock, the secure emergency phone resting on my kitchen counter began to vibrate. I let it ring a few times, enjoying the rhythmic sound of their growing desperation. Before finally pressing the green button to accept the call, I was immediately greeted by a sophisticated digital chime, indicating I had just been patched into a high-level corporate conference line. "Natalie, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today," a smooth baritone voice echoed through the speaker. It was Marcus, the incredibly wealthy and notoriously ruthless chairman of the Aetherus Board of Directors. I noted instantly that Julian was entirely absent from the call. There was no heavy breathing, no arrogant demands, and no frantic sobbing. Instead, I was surrounded by the polished, sickeningly sweet voices of the corporate elite, desperately trying to apply a velvet glove over a catastrophic iron reality. The hypocrisy was thick enough to cut with a knife. "We want to start by offering our most sincere and profound apologies," Marcus continued, his tone dripping with a carefully calculated, manufactured warmth. "What happened in your office 2 days ago was an absolute travesty. We have reviewed the situation comprehensively, and we all agree that Julian acted with the impulsive, reckless misjudgment of youthful inexperience. He let the stress of the new era transition cloud his common sense. His behavior does not reflect the values of this board, and he has been severely reprimanded. It was a masterclass in corporate gaslighting. They were casually dismissing a calculated theft and a brutal firing as a simple case of youthful indiscretion, completely ignoring the fact that Julian was a grown man who had actively embezzled project funds to pay off underground gambling debts. We recognize that you are the absolute lifeblood of the Medical Artificial Intelligence Division, Natalie. Another board member chimed in, her voice soft and maternal. The company simply cannot function without your brilliant mind. Therefore, the board has unanimously voted to offer you the position of Executive Director of Systems Engineering. We are prepared to guarantee a permanent, binding contract that will exactly triple your previous base salary. Furthermore, we have already authorized the accounting department to instantly wire your $300,000 performance bonus directly into your personal checking account the moment we conclude this call. They let the offer hang in the air, a massive, glittering golden parachute. To any ordinary person, the sheer volume of that wealth would have been blinding. A tripled salary and immediate access to hundreds of thousands of dollars was enough money to secure a comfortable life for decades. They were banking entirely on human greed, hoping the heavy bags of cash would crush my sense of justice. There is, however, just one minor administrative housekeeping item we need to clear up before we process the wire transfer, Marcus interjected, his voice dropping into a casual, breezy register. He was trying entirely too hard to sound nonchalant. Our legal team has prepared a standard, highly lucrative non-disclosure agreement for your new executive role. Tucked inside that agreement is a brief, standard compliance addendum. We simply need you to sign a retroactive declaration stating that you voluntarily and verbally authorized the temporary transfer of your federal security credentials to the junior intern yesterday morning. There it was, the ultimate trap. They were not offering me a promotion. They were offering me a highly paid position as the fall guy. They had fully reviewed the server logs and realized that Julian had committed a severe federal crime by forging my digital signature on government medical documents. Now, this boardroom of billionaires was attempting to politely bribe me into legally adopting his felony. If I signed that paper, Julian's massive federal fraud would magically transform into a harmless, internal communication error between engineers. I would become an active, willing accomplice to a crime against the United States government. I let the silence stretch for a long, agonizing moment. I wanted them to sit in the quiet, holding their breath, genuinely believing that their vast wealth had successfully bought my compliance. Then I laughed. It was not a polite chuckle. It was a sharp, cold, echoing laugh of pure, unadulterated contempt that sliced right through their carefully constructed corporate illusion. "You really think I am that stupid, Marcus?" I asked, my voice dropping its calm facade and sharpening into a lethal blade. "You think you can wrap a federal indictment in a shiny red bow and I will just swallow it whole?" "Natalie, please be reasonable," Marcus stammered, the manufactured warmth instantly vanishing from his voice. "This is a highly beneficial arrangement for everyone involved. Yesterday morning, at exactly 7 hours, 14 minutes, and 32 seconds, I stated, reading directly from the encrypted file I had sent to my attorney. An unauthorized user bypassed the internal firewall. They utilized Internet Protocol address 10.0.0.45. The machine hardware identifier explicitly, undeniably matches the customized executive terminal located securely inside the Vice President's suite. That user then accessed the Federal Medical Compliance Portal and illegally deployed a cloned, cryptographic copy of my digital signature." I heard a sharp, collective intake of breath from the other end of the line. The entire boardroom plunged into a state of horrifying, dead silence. They suddenly realized I was not guessing. I had the exact, irrefutable digital receipts. "You are not offering me a job," I continued, my words striking them like physical blows. "You are desperately trying to bribe a witness to a massive federal fraud conspiracy. Julian forged medical documents to deceive the Food and Drug Administration, and you are all currently recorded on this line attempting to cover it up." "Natalie, wait. We can renegotiate the terms," the chairman pleaded, his polished demeanor completely shattering into raw panic. "There are no negotiations," I declared loudly, establishing my absolute dominance over the situation. "I will never sell my freedom to become a shield for a pathetic, gambling-addicted criminal. I am keeping my integrity, and you are all keeping the consequences." Without waiting for another desperate, pathetic word from the panicked billionaires, I slammed my finger onto the screen, disconnecting the call and completely severing their final desperate lifeline. By 8 o'clock that evening, the adrenaline of the morning had completely faded, leaving behind a quiet, resolute calm. I was standing in my kitchen, preparing a simple dinner, when a firm, unexpected knock echoed through my apartment door. I did not often receive visitors, especially not unannounced. When I opened the door, I was entirely shocked to find a tall, distinguished man standing in the hallway, looking utterly exhausted but intensely focused. It was Richard, the Chief Technology Officer of Vanguard Health. "May I come in?" Richard asked, his voice rough from what had clearly been a very long day of corporate warfare. I stepped aside, gesturing to the kitchen island. Richard walked in, placed a heavy leather briefcase on my counter, and let out a long, deep sigh. He looked at me with a mixture of immense respect and utter exhaustion. "We are completely finished with Etherius," Richard stated, wasting no time on pleasantries. "Their board of directors spent the entire afternoon lying through their teeth to us. They claimed the system outage was a minor technical glitch and that you were on a sudden leave of absence. But we are a hospital network. Natalie, we do not gamble with patient safety, and we certainly do not gamble with a $50 million contract based on the word of a desperate executive board." He opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of pristine legal documents. "When the system locked us out, our legal team initiated an immediate, aggressive audit of the entire partnership," Richard explained, a sharp smile finally breaking through his tired expression. "We started digging into the foundational intellectual property of the diagnostic artificial intelligence, and we found something absolutely fascinating. Etherius does not actually own the core machine learning algorithm. You do?" I felt a slow, triumphant smile spread across my face. He had found my hidden ace. Long before I ever accepted the job at Etherius, I had independently developed and legally patented the foundational code for that medical algorithm. When I joined the company, I granted them a licensing agreement to utilize my patent, but that agreement was strictly contingent upon my active employment. The moment Julian arrogantly fired me, he legally severed their right to use the very technology that powered their entire enterprise. "Aetherus was just renting the engine," Richard said, tapping the documents on the table. "And Vanguard Health has absolutely zero interest in doing business with a company that just evicted its own landlord. We have officially terminated our $50 million contract with Etherius due to gross negligence and breach of security." He slid a sleek, silver pen across the counter toward me. "Vanguard Health wants to buy the exclusive licensing rights to your patent directly from you," Richard announced, his eyes locking onto mine with absolute seriousness. "We are offering an upfront payment of $3 million. Furthermore, we want to bring you on board immediately as an independent medical systems consultant. You will have full autonomy, total creative control, and you will not answer to any arrogant executives or out-of-touch board members. You build the systems, we save the lives." It was the ultimate checkmate. I looked down at the contract resting on my simple wooden kitchen table, without a single moment of hesitation. I picked up the silver pen and signed my name on the dotted line. In one swift stroke of ink, I secured my financial future and officially buried the absolute last remaining hope for Etherius Medical Robotics. The sheer scale of the devastation unfolded with breathtaking speed. Just 3 days later, the trap I had carefully laid with my attorney violently snapped shut. He had forwarded the encrypted server logs and the irrefutable evidence of Julian's digital forgery directly to the federal authorities. I watched it all happen live on the local evening news. A fleet of black government vehicles suddenly swarmed the Etherius headquarters. Dozens of federal agents wearing blue windbreakers with the letters FBI printed in massive yellow letters stormed the glass lobby, accompanied by stern inspectors from the Food and Drug Administration. The cameras captured the exact moment Julian was marched out the front doors. His expensive tailored suit was rumpled. His face was pale with sheer terror, and his hands were secured tightly in heavy steel handcuffs. He was being hauled away to face multiple federal charges for medical record fraud and corporate embezzlement. The collateral damage was spectacular. The news anchor calmly reported that the chief executive officer, Julian's father, had been forced into an immediate, disgraced resignation by a furious board of directors. Following the loss of the Vanguard contract and the highly publicized federal raid, Ethera's stock violently plummeted by 80% in a single afternoon. Their corporate empire was reduced to absolute ashes. I sat comfortably on my living room sofa, watching the chaotic footage replay on the screen. I picked up my glass and took a slow, satisfying sip of red wine. A profound sense of peace washed over my entire soul as I watched the arrogant fools who had tried to ruin my life get completely swallowed by the fire they had started. I realized the most valuable lesson of all. Sometimes, the most brutal, flawless revenge does not require you to raise your voice, throw a punch, or actively destroy your enemies. Sometimes, the most ruthless thing you can do is simply walk out the door. Take your brilliance with you, and patiently watch as arrogant, ignorant people inevitably burn their own kingdom right to the ground. Thank you so much, dear listeners, for tuning in and staying with me until the very end of this incredible journey. I would love to know where you are listening from today, so please let me know your city or country in the comments below. As I mentioned earlier, YouTube has disabled our monetization features, meaning we can no longer afford to operate and will absolutely not be uploading new videos here in the near future. We are transitioning all of our operations over to Patreon. If you enjoyed today's story and want to help us survive, please support us by joining the Boss Revenge Stories Patreon channel. There, you will hear the absolute best, most detailed, exclusive true stories that we simply cannot publish on YouTube. You can join right now by scanning the Patreon QR code on your screen, or by clicking the direct link provided in the video description and the pinned comments.